This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
In this episode of Leap Forward, we're joined by Sarah Sillars, an influential figure in the automotive industry. Sarah shares her impressive career journey from her early days in management training at Ford to her roles as chief executive at the Institute of the Motor Industry. She discusses the importance of talent development, adapting to market changes, and the ongoing evolution in automotive training in light of the rise of electric and autonomous vehicles. This episode is packed with insights for anyone looking to navigate the future of the industry. Let's get started. So I'm delighted to have with me a very special guest, Sarah Sillars. Thank you for joining us on this Leap Forward podcast.
My pleasure.
Been looking forward to this one. Sarah, you have obviously an incredibly distinguished kind of career in this sector, as well as being a very valued advisor to Bridge. But I wondered if you could kind of just kick off this conversation with a little bit of a kind of career journey to date.
So life started in Marks and Spencer's as a Saturday girl, which I didn't enjoy much, being on footwear, and decided from very early stage that I wanted to be in the kind of the training leading role rather than on the wrong end of customer service. And I was very lucky. I joined Marks and Spencer at their invite as a management trainee. And I was very naive in those days because I thought the fact that it said management trainee on the title meant that I actually was going to be in charge of things. And what I learned very quickly was that Marks and Spencer's training program was deemed to be very good at that stage, because actually you spent 18 months learning all the ropes. You stacked shelves, you went on tills, you swept the floor, you did the security checks, you did the warehouse. So actually, by the time I became a senior manager for Marks and Spencer, I really felt I'd been through a very big journey. So I've really enjoyed that. P&L responsibility, merchandising, customer service, compliance. It was good. It was a great mix. And then I went and had 2 children and decided that I would like to go back part-time. And unbelievably, all those decades ago, Marks and Spencer would have no part-time management, which given now, late night trading, Sunday trading, a whole plethora of different opportunities now to be in flexible working or part-time management. So I couldn't go back. So about a week later, the phone rang, and somebody that had been running a Ford dealership in Edinburgh had been invited, having not been successful on a management buyout, to actually go and work for Ford Motor Company in the strategy department, looking at a very new program called in dealer training. Ford had been excellent at technical training, product training, but hadn't really looked at the soft skills, the managerial skills. Good salespeople often became the sales managers, good service technicians often became the service managers, and nobody gave them that kind of trip between being an excellent operator into management. And I was one of the first 15 to join that team. Within a couple of years, we had 100. And a few years later, I became ops director. So that was great. Worked a lot with the PAG group that got Mazda and so forth. And then I got headhunted to go and run the Institute of the Motor Industry, which I did a bit of a sort of, are you talking to me? Because I didn't really know about it. After a few conversations, recognize that a professional body that is meant to help and aid people on their journey and source the sector with talent and capability suddenly looked very attractive. So I had 11 excellent years at the Institute of the Motor Industry as chief executive and then chair. And then I was fortunate enough to be headhunted to go to the Engineering Sector Skills Council. So I saw automotive really from the other side, very much from the manufacturing side, but aerospace as well, and composite and marine. And then my latter days in full time were running the Institute of Advanced Motorists because, like the IMI, it needed to be on a bit of a reinvention journey. Great spirit and soul, but had just become slightly displaced with how things had progressed in the learning and development world.
And bringing us all up to kind of 2024, you operate on a number of boards as well.
I do. So having thought that once I wasn't full time, I wasn't sure quite how I was going to get my what I call brain food. I've been incredibly lucky. So I sit on three boards at the moment. I sit on the Citygate Automotive Board, which is fantastic because they operate primarily on the London kind of boundaries. So 17, 18 sites operating there. I've had a good innings sitting on the Remit training board, and that's fantastic, dedicated mainly to apprenticeships and funded training. And then a new division now on commercial training and getting ready really for a lot of the um, move towards electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. And then I work with a great team at Bridge, which is again about the blending of the future of training and digitalization and technologies and AI. And then I do three other roles, which are my pro bono give back roles. So a really lovely blend. But I've learned that my hobbies are all business related.
And you certainly have, throughout both your kind of professional career and passion and current roles, a kind of continued sort of thematic kind of aspect to what you do, which is all around development, personal development. You were lucky enough, and I've heard such great things about the M&S scheme,
Yeah.
and congratulations for getting on it, because I know it was very, very tough to get on. And that sort of link and that thread, I suppose, sort of brings us up to kind of 2024 and beyond. What is it about training, development, learning, that really inspires you and drives you?
I wasn't particularly good at school. I didn't find base subjects particularly engaging and I wasn't captivated. And I think some of that could be academic ability, or some of that could be the learning styles and the way. Often I've found people excel when they actually respect or warm to the style or manner of the tutors and so forth. So I left school at 16 and went to college. I went to Maidenhead and Windsor College, where they didn't do history and geography and French. They did economics, law, commerce, accountancy. So I went from being a very average student to getting very good grades by doing my further bit of education to A levels. Um, so my A levels were law and economics and commercial studies and English. So I managed to fit in a few sort of additional O levels or GCSEs and then do A levels. And it revolutionized my feeling about it's about being in the right environment to maximize your capability. And I think so many people never quite find the right role that engages them fully or inspires them to do more of what they could do if they want to. And that's really probably where I picked that absolute love of it. And then going on the management training scheme at Marks and Spencer's was inspirational because every day you learnt something different. You learnt so many disciplines of business. So to then get into store management roles or senior roles where you could apply that, and we were often having people come through that were looking for perhaps part-time work or full-time work or um, that weren't ambitious, but actually we spotted talent that they hadn't perhaps spotted for themselves. people that were fantastic at customer service or had got a real um, sort of head for figures and could end up going into the administration or accounts departments. So I've always had that reflective glow from other people meeting their kind of best self.
Yeah, finding that, helping them find their fit. It's such a rewarding process, right?
Mm.
And discovering people's superpowers and playing them in position. Um, just zeroing in a little bit onto kind of the automotive sector for a moment. Sort of, we're at an incredibly challenging, some people might say dynamic, others may say, but certainly kind of change is just everywhere at the moment in time. Um, and really thinking about that from a skills perspective, kind of what do you see as being the big issues that the industry is facing right now?
The change is absolutely, it's there, it's happening, and we're on that journey. So that's an absolute given. I think the automotive sector, and this is probably why I have a love affair with it, is fairly misrepresented between the talent and capability needed to work in it versus the very high quality product that has got so much tech on it. So we've not had as an industry, and this is definitely turning now by nature of the advancement of the tech. But in the past, we've had bad press about what working in dealerships is like or what working in parts departments are like. We've not necessarily had good perceptions for people looking in. So we've had to fight very hard, I think, against other industries that have attracted talent. What's happening at the moment is really quite radical because as we move now to much more around diagnostics, it's a much cleaner industry than was ever given kind of credit for. You've got people now looking at where their career skills can take them rather than just the jobs profile. So, if as an industry, particularly on the retail side, we need a huge amount of talent coming in around the ability to analyze data, to make interpretation, to manage um, the new changes that are coming in, that's going to appeal to such a different set of people than ever we had access to before. The industry is in two halves, really. Often people wanted to go and work for brands. They were very attracted to the likes of working for BMW or Ford or um, because a lot of our groups or our businesses aren't known in the same way as a high street brand like Marks and Spencers or John Lewis's or whatever, we never quite attracted people into our industry in the same way. And that's been a tragedy because actually there are so many fantastic opportunities for people, but we weren't perhaps particularly good at overcoming the poor press that we sometimes got, or some of the television programs that perhaps didn't do justice to our sector. So, actually, I think it's almost a perfect storm positively coming because I think we will appeal to people that are coming out with engineering degrees, with qualifications around IT and digitalization, whether it's marketing, whether it's advertising skills, whether it's HR, whether it's PR. Those businesses are all going to be evolving as the market changes.
And the technology piece, I think, is really interesting. Just focusing on that for a moment, in as much as that, sort of the amount of tech that is in any form of vehicle
Yes.
today is almost kind of exponentially more than 10, 15, 20 years ago, and we can only see that heading in one direction. And
Yes.
in a sense, I suppose that is an opportunity, but a challenge at the same time, right? In terms of the attractiveness of working in an industry where you're almost a kind of Silicon Valley style kind of
Yes.
sector, but
Yeah.
equally the skills that go along with that.
There's been some amazing advancements even in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. One of them has been the Automotive 30% Club has been set up by Julia Muir, and hats off to her. She's gathered like-minded CEOs to say, half the population are female, more than half of the population are the chief decision makers on car purchase. Why haven't we got our businesses reflective of the consumer base that we work with? So, automotive has less than 20% female balance at the moment. So, the automotive 30% club that's looking to aim for, as the title says, 30% of management in the senior leadership teams in those businesses that are committed are already seeing a step change, because as you get more and more diversification, more and more different ideas, thought processes, ability to align with your customer base. Just recently, the nominations for inspiring women in the sector has gone up to 500. A few years ago, Justin, you'd have been lucky for that to have been 10. So
Wow.
actually, the progress that's being made with the recognition of the skills that might be needed, and as the roles change, we're also really, really being well supported by a change in the diversification of the sector. It will take a long time. Don't forget, the automotive industry has been very male dominated for 100 years. So it won't happen overnight, but it actually is mappable where you've got more diverse teams, we're seeing more diversity, not just on gender, but on ethnicity and with disability and so forth. So actually, I think we're a sector that's moved slowly in some ways on the skills piece, but now we're moving much more quickly.
And alongside that, the 30% sort of initiative, what other kind of programs and approaches is the industry kind of taking to realize that and make that happen?
So, with one of my hats as a vice president of the IMI, obviously they've invested very, very heavily in energies to do There's More to Motor campaign. And that's been spearheaded by a very inspiring woman, Linda Jackson, who's global CEO of Peugeot, who has said, unless we change how we look, we're not going to actually be on the radar of people like the careers teachers. I mean, the biggest influences on career are your parents or the people that bring you up, and your school teachers. So if we're not doing a good job making sure that we're a very, very progressive modern industry with lots of bells and whistles and some fantastic product, and it's only going to get more exciting, then actually, if we don't tackle some of those, there's a lot of work going on to try and educate the educators.
Hmm.
And then you've got other things that are progressing quite positively, which is the focus on apprenticeships. Automotive retail has always been excellent at having apprentices coming into business. They are the homegrown talent. And more female young women are coming in now to apprenticeships because they're not seeing it as the old style mechanic. It's actually a highly technical piece. And now we've got qualifications as things become more and more automated. ADAS is one of the new qualifications. We've got all the cybersecurity challenges as well as solutions coming through. So actually, quite a few of the initiatives that are happening are emerging almost positively at the same time.
And also, I suppose, in a sense, those skills needs that the industry has make it almost more attractive to that next generation of talent, because perhaps there wasn't the perception that you could go into this sector as an AI interface manager and so on, right?
People would have looked at you as if you'd got three heads 5 years ago,
Yeah.
So I don't know if you spend much time around little tiny tots, but they put a lot of us to shame in their ability to not be fearful or frightened of anything tech. Any adult that's got a phone and you've got an 18-month-year-old, you know, run for cover because they're going to know how to swipe it. Um, so I think we've got a large job to do to increase the confidence and skills of people in our sector around mainly the retail side, because many people haven't been native to that.
Hmm.
Even if you've got kids in your 30s or so, they actually are saying, gosh, the younger generation are much more savvy, much more comfortable, and much more at ease. So, in a way, the fact that particularly like the work Bridge are doing in bringing training to the business, to the individual, anytime, any place, anywhere, on any whether it's a phone or a tablet or whatever. And if we can then use particularly the experience that we're seeing of being able to use AI to give immediate feedback on learning pathways and actually be able to act as almost an online coach and guide, then actually business are going to warm to it for two reasons. One is the biggest issue getting people trained is taking them out of the business and losing that productive time, as well as having the travel time and so forth. And the other one is it's always been very hard within automotive retail to give people the comfort of what the return on investment has been on that training. So, from an individual as well as a business point of view, I think what's now coming through, and particularly the very innovative work that Bridge are doing, is absolutely right for the marketplace because it's going to deliver relevant training, feedback, a live edge.
And the impact of that is, increased productivity, financial performance, retention, and being able to articulate the impact of that at a sort of board level is critical, particularly now
Yeah.
in the current climate.
One of the things we have to guard against is not getting talent and losing it. We have had, I think it's coming down now, but across the industry, we have had fairly high turnover. And that's quite damaging because you're bringing in new resource, you're training, and then losing that talent. Or you're not training and losing it even quicker. So, retention, and some of the things that I've been looking at, some of the recruitment work I've been doing with some other organizations, is to actually say what are the key things that new employees are actually looking for. And touched on it earlier, but actually, they want to be able to get skills and use their career skills. And sometimes a recognition or being advanced laterally rather than just the
Mhm.
traditional progressive route up the ladder is becoming more important.
Mhm.
So, flexibility, recognition, trust, and autonomy are coming out as some of the key requirements as people start their career journeys. So, I think the way the skills landscape is changing with what's being made available will actually assist businesses quite considerably on that because high turnover is very, very expensive.
And you touched on it sort of briefly already, but I'd like to kind of just hear a little bit more about sort of your view of how we actually deliver this. How are we embracing technology? How can we learn from the many decades of great work that's gone into building out the right pathways and to really achieve those sorts of outcomes and overcome some of the challenges that we've got around skills and so on.
I think in some ways we have to separate out where you need a human intervention and where you don't. So I think there will always be certain training where you will need direct feedback, where you're going to be perhaps talked through the culture of a company, the history of the company, or so forth. So, whereas I think, for example, take induction training. Quite often, companies haven't done induction training till someone's been there for 6 weeks because they don't want to invest in them unless they're going to stay. There was a famous expression, wasn't there? Try not training, investing people and having them stay. So I think things like induction, I think we can use digital learning, having preset materials delivered to you on your phone, a
Hmm.
welcome message, a message from your CEO. Hello, it's Monday. Delighted to welcome all of you to the business. So I think there's that sort of stuff that we can do much more quickly,
Hmm.
much more pertinently to make sure that individuals feel that they have been onboarded and are part of the community. A lot of companies now are doing their technical training. The bits that they can, they'll do it remotely, but you may well always need to have then physical assessment or endpoint assessment or so forth. So I think it's getting the right pieces in play. I don't believe everything can be digitalized. I don't think technology will deal with everything,
Hmm.
but I think it can take a huge amount of the lost time, high cost away to make it very efficient.
And what have you seen in terms of adaptive and sort of and personalized learning? How can we use technology to deliver a more personalized kind of learning journey?
LMS systems have been around for a long, long time. And to my mind, some of them work reasonably well, some of them are pretty poor, and some of the new stuff is very progressive because instead of it being rote and just putting people through 10 modules, if it can almost do the reverse, which is start with the assessment of what is required, so that you get much more. We used to call them credits, but almost let's not retrain people on stuff that actually they're very competent at. Let's actually make more of it about how to move on to the next stage. So, with so many people being slightly fearful of getting it wrong with technology or not being able to maximize what's there. Um, I think we need to actually embrace that more because pretty much I can't think of many people that don't have a mobile phone. So even if companies don't give mobile phones, you've got a learning tool there that could be used really, really positively. And if we can get some of the AI feedback done where people are being trained on material, if you take, for example, something that's a compliance issue or it's a legal requirement, then actually, from what I've seen, and particularly some of the stuff that I've seen that Bridge has, it's absolutely fantastic for giving people the core training that they need and then an assessment method so that the business can take comfort that actually someone has been through the right training, and that can all be logged on to an LMS. But what you don't want is a learning management system that just has a list of courses that's going to try and force people through when it's not appropriate to either their capability or the currency of what they're doing at that time. So I think there's a bit of lifting the lid up and having a look in to see where are we at? Where do we need to be?
And I think, to your point around young, whether it's, small tots or slightly older than that, members of the human race, we are obviously all of us very immersed in the use of technology in our consumer lives, and
Yes.
we're very adept at sort of kind of moving across various forms of media. How can the industry sort of capitalize on that sort of innate sort of sense of usage of that type of media to drive better learning outcomes?
I personally think we've got to use things like TikTok or short, snappy pieces where people can really almost say, have you seen this? Have you seen that? This is fantastic.
Hmm.
We've got to engage people and break that sort of threshold of getting them across the line. There does seem to be some generational divides, and I think the more that we can spread that through, the better. One of the main reasons that I was very delighted to join the bridge team as a skills champion and an ambassador is it's far too easy to stay comfortable in what you used to do
Mm.
and what you used to know.
Mhm.
And therefore, if at my grand age I can keep learning about what we can do for the sector, what we can take to the sector to make it more productive and more efficient and give more profitability so that those roles do stay being developed and progress, then actually that's the future. It isn't what we've had before.
You made a great point earlier, and I think the phrase was "educate the educators." And I was thinking then, as you were just talking, how do you, I suppose, in a sense, educate the buyers? How do you educate the employers? How do you educate the board on adopting this type of approach?
So, very interestingly, some of the boards have got a huge amount of talent and experience, and they've been through all sorts of major events, but perhaps have been on systems that would now be considered aging. So you've got to have people, particularly with the renewal of boards and so forth. If you look at good governance structures, then people should do a 3-year term and then a second 3-year term. And there's a lot of advice not to keep people on boards more than about 6 years. And I actually think that's come into play more and more in recent times because if you're not then bringing people that are at the leading edge
Mhm.
or have adapted their own business or are really smelling the coffee every day. I had a fantastic conversation recently with John Neal, the group CEO of Unipart. And he was a vice president in my time at the IMI. And I said, what's new, John? I'm always interested in what he's looking at. And he said, I spend a minimum of an hour a day keeping a pace with what's happening with AI, digitalization, technology. And I thought, yeah. And therefore, you're
Mhm.
not going to be the one that someone's going to say, oh, I think we should be looking at this. So I think, although a lot of our industry leaders have got very successful careers behind them, I bet all of them, if they're not doing it
Mhm.
themselves, are looking out for people to be key allies and assets on their senior teams, looking at what roles are going to phase out and what roles are going to come in. And one of the easiest ones to identify is the whole omni-channel. Are people buying physically or are they buying online? And when I was out at NADA uh, in early 24, what I discovered was that lots of people think that they're actually doing an integrated approach, but their systems are doing online in one way and physical in the other, and they're having to almost map it. And that's not an omni-channel. So as businesses move towards needing um, to make that change, that's when I think we'll start seeing the real progress on that.
And I think that's a really interesting point around sort of disconnectedness and fragmentation as a challenge. But also, we can kind of apply that to the industry itself because this is an industry that has clearly a very very strong motive to sell.
Yes.
It also needs to basically then provide an after sale kind of experience, and I've heard lots about sort of in some cases that being quite disjointed, and with the way the market is moving now, the opportunity may well be shifting in terms of
Yes.
those two sort of areas. How do you kind of then apply that to the skills agenda?
So the skills agenda, I think, is going to change even more rapidly than it has previously because we've had a change of government as well
Mm.
recently. And in a completely non political way, we've almost reached a saturation, I think, in the UK, where the ambition for 50% of young people to go to university and all live the dream of having had that chance is, to my mind, unfolding quite rapidly over the last
Mm.
year or so. And I think as employers want more and more of their own talent, embedding what is going to be the difference when we've got all of this technology. Some of the difference is going to be the customer service and the loyalty factor or the retention to certain brands or companies or whatever. So I think we will see a step change in training. I think we will see more money going to the reskilling of people as our industries change in terms of their technical footprint. I think we'll see money being used for more apprenticeships. We've never really recovered from the pandemic on apprenticeships. So I think the landscape will change quite rapidly. So you'll have an awful lot of technical people because a lot of the new roles that will come in um, will require that technical expertise, but perhaps not in the way as we used to recognize it. And I think there will be opportunity for companies to grow their own talent more because they can train them from the outset and bring them in.
You used the word autonomy earlier. I think that's a really interesting
Yes.
kind of concept. And alongside that, I suppose, in a sense, with all of your experience at the IMI as a professional body, you must have kind of a really interesting kind of perspective on the different stakeholders in the industry and how their perception of skills is either the same or different. How do you bring that together? How do you corral it to achieve what you're looking to try and
When
do?
I first got to the IMI, I thought I'll just have a think about how many other bodies there are in this kind of trade association, professional association landscape, because I'd mainly worked only in the manufacturers or with the dealerships. And you will be shocked to know that at that time there were 42 different organisations, all seeing their area clearly as very important. So there are common themes for all businesses, and one is maximizing productivity and maximizing the opportunity for profitability. So I think coming at it from a not-for-profit organization where you're actually looking about your industry in competition with other industries, then you actually end up looking outside more than inside your industry. And I think we've got some of that to do now as well, because there are industries that are just not attractive to people. They're not on the radar. So I think in some ways, whether you're a manufacturer or whether you're a dealer group, whether you're making parts, whether you're supplying data or whatever, I don't think we're in competition with each other across our sector. I think our biggest competition is making sure we hold up firm against other industries. And I think there's quite an agreement across the key bodies that we've actually got to make sure that the workforce of today and of the future get to see this amazing industry. When I was a little girl, I used to watch a program and it had this lady Penelope, and she used to call for Parker to bring the car around. Well, soon we won't need Lady Penelope and Parker. We'll be saying, to our app, come pick me up.
Autonomous, here we come.
Absolutely. We're going to have, um, I watched some drone packages being landed the other day. So the sector's got its challenges, yes.
Yeah.
And I could go into whether I think, the supply industries or the tiers, from, top to bottom, where they're going to have it. I don't think that's our biggest issue. I think it's actually making sure that we are progressive in the way that we not only recruit into the sector, but what we then do with the talent that we get in it.
And on that sort of recruitment and then progression sort of piece, the industry, we talk about it sort of as an industry, but it's obviously incredibly complicated, as you've sort of already outlined in many ways. But also there are a large number of SMBs, small business, small to medium sized
Yes.
industries inside. How do we kind of enable them? How do we empower them? Because they don't necessarily have the resources of a large manufacturer or a large dealer
No.
network.
So the large organisations are always the easiest to get to, and they've usually then got things like maybe an HR manager, they might have a training or learning specialist, or they might have. But because our sector has always had an amazing number of either sole traders or SMEs, that's where the other trade association bodies really come in. Um, to their own. So, for example, on the dealership side, if you're a very small business or an independent, your best bet is being affiliated to your trade associations. So, something like the Retail Motor Industry Federation, they've got a separate division for the Independent Garage Association. They're looking at almost the sum total of the SMEs as a collective. What can we do to support them? What training can we offer? What services? So if somebody can't afford an HR department or a legal helpline or whatever, in the same way as they can facilitate and help that, they can actually help facilitate the learning and development that's required. Um, and they are naturally looking at what services or companies or technology can be used to help those businesses. So the independent sector, by nature, it's often dealing with vehicles that are outside of the initial warranty period. Often consumers will naturally go back to where they've got the warranty. But the independent garage market is very, very significant, and we need to make sure that we are giving as much information to all aspects of our industry as we can about what is the art of the possible now with the new way of doing training and development that actually has a learning outcome. I think one of the failings, and this really relates to an earlier question, one of the failings of training over many decades, not just in our industry, has been the inability to measure the outcome.
Mhm. Agreed. And how has that evolved? How are we doing it now? How are we better than we were?
We are better than we were. I think happy sheets, need to be banned because, if you finish a course at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and you haven't got to go back to work, then it used to be, big smiley face. But actually, it's 2 weeks down the line. What have you actually recalled? And, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, what have you actually been able to implement? Have you actually been able to reduce inefficiencies or increase customer service or whatever it may be? The IMI did a very good study on calculating the impact of having apprentices in the business. The industry has only surprisingly, although it has a very good number of apprenticeships by comparison to other sectors, only 11% of businesses take on an apprentice. And so, one of the things that's been calculated is what is the return on investment on apprentice? And once you can start showing figures and facts to organizations, that starts to have an impact. And I think we have to do the same with a lot of the other training. So if we can show, for example, that if we did FCA compliance work and actually can do some role plays and feed that back and have it analysed by AI so that it's not got the costs of expensive trainers having to turn up, but actually if somebody isn't grasping it, is failing to understand it, that's the time to then put the personal intervention in to say, right, let's talk about why is that person a vulnerable customer? What's the best way that we can perhaps respectfully try and assist them without risking failing what is now considered to be a very serious matter if we're forcing finance on people that aren't able to accept it because of debt or mental health or whatever.
And the wider kind of regulatory kind of aspect beyond finance, safety and so forth, right? This is, we're moving to a very, again, going back to a very highly technical kind of and technology based kind of world, and so these new issues need to be regulated, and we need to be training people on that and demonstrating the either the reduction in risk or the increase in productivity.
You raise an absolutely totally key point for our sector to embrace this way of training easily, because if you look at health and safety, or if you look at FCA regulation, some of those, there are such core modules that are so imperative that people understand it, get it, are covered for their safety, for customers' safety, or whatever. That if we can use almost the stuff that is mandated and has to happen in a way to break some businesses into this new way of learning, I think it will actually then showcase the art of the possible for those that have perhaps been a little slower to embrace it.
You mentioned a recent trip to NADA in the States.
Yeah.
We're operating in a global market with global businesses. Tell me a little bit about sort of, the more kind of international kind of dynamics that are going on in the world of skills and training and development.
The trip to NADA was totally fascinating for me because I've been many times, and this was the first time that skills and development weren't one of the biggest showcase items for all the speakers or the lecturers. And that's because with the state of American politics, and with the size of the vehicles and the trucks and the whole issue around diesel and petrol, and a very slow acceptance of the move away from fossil fuels, then actually the political landscape for the first time ever overshadowed the skills agenda. But those that were there, and there were a lot less people showcasing skills. And I think it was interesting. I think the reason that that happened is when an industry is kind of taken with something that is bigger, which is about they're all in it together, a real nervousness about the impact of moving away from fossil fuels, then actually maybe some of the regular attendees and the regular presenters had kind of smelt the coffee. Those that I did visit and those that I saw, then absolutely everything we've talked about the skills agenda, having to engage people much more quickly earlier in their tenure, in their employment, getting the induction piece all on your mobile phone, welcome on day one, here's your onboarding pack, here's your payroll details, right, off you go to your business to meet people and do all the stuff you need to do. So, training definitely across the pond was very, very much about the digitalization piece, but using data much more positively, analyzing what people have picked up, what they haven't, and so forth. So I think data analysis is something that perhaps we've been poor on, and we will need to look at it here more. As far as the Europeans are concerned, a lot more is coming out of central head offices and so forth rather than being distilled to local markets. And I think that's part of the kind of globalization of the change of the way that we are operating. So, big opportunity, I think, for our local market to do what's best in theirs. There's some fantastic programs called Be the Best in Town. Embrace the technology, but actually make sure the talents that your people have actually make your customer or your local consumers go, that was a fantastic experience. I felt that I was listened to. I felt that they had the autonomy to deal with my inquiry. I trusted them to come back to me, and they did. So I think we're going to see a stronger spike in what we need people to be able to do, and that needs training. And I think we're also going to see an ability to take cost out by maximizing the technology. Just yesterday, there was a fascinating piece around actually teaching some of the younger generations that are about to embark into the workplace about what does workplace etiquette look like these days. And I thought that was very interesting.
I'd love you to expand on that in a moment. Before we finish up on the international piece, I just wanted to get your perspective on, you talked about sort of the Americas and you've talked about Europe. Obviously, we're seeing, a real sort of re-changing of the guard somewhat and a reorientation of the axis. And perhaps you could kind of just give me a perspective on sort of the rise of kind of the continued rise of Asia, I suppose, in a sense, particularly China.
So certainly I'm seeing it firsthand because where I sit on franchise dealer boards, we're seeing the Chinese brands coming through. Some of the product is exceptionally good. And obviously, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around tariffs and what's going to be a fair marketplace and so forth. But if you take that to one side, what's been really interesting is that there's no aftermarket yet. So actually, in a way, we're playing catch
Hmm.
up, and there's lots of operators saying, right, I want to be in that market, but where do I need to get my technicians trained? Oh, actually, there's nothing for the first 2 years or whatever. So we're going to see an evolving change there, whereby I think historically manufacturers have been quite protective about their own training and not having dual sites and all sorts of things. I think we're going to see that landscape change significantly, and I think we'll see a lot more ease probably with some of the Asian manufacturers about teaming up with other manufacturers for the shared services of technical capability. That's my prediction.
I think it's fascinating because, in a sense, it's almost an element of a blank canvas.
Yes.
And if you were to, have that canvas, how would you be painting it today?
So for me, I think as businesses consolidate, the market share piece is fascinating if it's your thing to track it. Now it's going to be about how many units are sold because we've got so many players. There's some fantastic pictorial um, expressions of just the number of manufacturers, whether it's going to be India or whether it's China or wherever. So my landscape picture is that there will be um, smaller number of dealers operating out there, but with wider remits, and that we'll have technical capability of plug-in diagnostics, where we'll see some of the manufacturers actually blend in together with their overseas counterparts. So we'll see the race for the market to be less about brand specific.
Very, very interesting. And I guess the skills side that you were sort of just talking about there are we talked a little bit about sort of the kind of the hard skills shift
Yes.
and change, but tell me more about that sort of softer or power skill that you see being so critical in this industry's future.
I'm hoping that the more that we can get done online automatically, where systems can process information, that it will throw up a little bit more time for frontline staff, particularly, to be able to talk to their customer. We're going to see less people, I think, going into businesses. I think we'll have collection and delivery happening more and more. But I think the personal side, when you do get the interface, is going to have to be absolutely top notch, because indifference can just be then taken to another outlet. Um, People aren't as loyal as they used to be. So if you don't invest in those people skills, the making eye contact, all the old fashioned things, the nodding of agreement or questioning or checking, taking time to make sure that somebody um, feels that they're being listened to. I think those kind of skills are going to need leadership as well.
And going back to your Sarah at the beginning of her career,
Yes.
what one piece of advice would you give to someone considering entering this industry?
I would say don't blink twice, go for it, because there is now every discipline of every job function within the companies that you'll see in other industries. Um, and there's some very tenacious, there's some very entrepreneurial people. If you want a job where you go in, do your job, and go home, There's a few of those, but there's lots of opportunity for people that want to either grow laterally or progressively up the chain. So please give us a shout.
Sarah, thank you for joining this podcast. It's been great to have you on Leap Forward.
Super. Thank you.